This morning we want to celebrate communion. And I've just had it on my heart for several weeks that this would be the day we would have Thanksgiving communion. And so we're going to share different aspects of what Jesus told us about communion, but the title of my message today is Come to the Table. Now you've noticed that we have the communion table set up. We've got two chairs on either side. And I've already told the people we've got too small of a sanctuary to do what we need to do. I wanted to have a table set up like a Thanksgiving table. But we'll do with what we have to do today. Come to the table, a table of thanksgiving. I found it very interesting as you go through the scriptures in the Word of God. There is one particular chapter in the book of Psalms, 136, that devotes every verse to thanksgiving, and the reason given to be thankful is that His mercy endures forever. Thanksgiving should be the walk of our hearts with God. In John 6, Jesus has just fed 5,000 men, and you add women and children to that, it'd be much more, with 5 loaves of barley bread and 2 small fish. He leaves to go across the lake, and people follow him. And when he gets to the other side, he makes this statement, I say to you, you seek me not because you saw signs, but because you ate of the loaves and you were filled. That brings us to this Thursday. Every one of us will have one thing in common on Thursday. We'll be waiting on the one doing the cooking to say, it's time to eat. Come on now. We all sit there so pious and think, not me. But the football games are scheduled at such a time that you can get to the table, you can debone the turkey, you can scarf down the ham, all the trimmings that go with it, whether you like sweet cornbread or plain cornbread, dressing, sweet potato supreme. I hated sweet potatoes, but you add all that sugar, and you add all those mushrooms, you add all that coconut. What did I say? Back up. Well, mine has marshmallows in it. Where did mushrooms come from? That's fungus. That's in the dressing. No, it's not even in our dressing. But we're waiting on someone to say, come on, let's eat. Now, some of us will go to the kitchen to help. We're not a lot of help in the kitchen, but what I want to do is I want to go through there and make sure it all tastes right. You know, the king had a taster. And if he ate a little bit and he died, you didn't want to eat what they had. So I'm the taster at our house. We have 3 animals, speaking of which, what do you call a dog, a stray dog that you give a little bit of food to? Your pet. Because once you feed a stray dog, he's going to be yours from now on. I can't believe that I'm about to say this in public, but we have 3 dogs at our house, not including me and Keenan. And when we go to the table, there's 3 of us that sit at the table. And there's 3 dogs that sit at each of our feet. And they're all looking up at the table. All because my wife feeds them from the table all the time. That's not true. I'm the one that does that. I'll slip something down, and I don't think Marla saw it, and all of a sudden she'll say, don't give that to the dog, it'll kill him. So I pick out which one's her dog and feed. No, I don't do that anymore. But you know, when you feed a dog, it's yours forever. My mom we had in the neighborhood where she was, there was a little black dog that had had several litters of puppies but had been treated very poorly. Actually, the throat had been cut at one time, the ear had been cut off, different things had happened. And this dog was afraid of people, period. But Mom would start going outside the fence and lay something there, and when she would disappear, that dog would come and eat. And little by little, over a period of a year or so, the dog would get to where it would be there waiting on Mom to go outside and give it something, but it would shy away. So much so that Mom was the only one after a year or so that would be able to feed that dog and pet the dog. If I came around, or Dad, or Jana, or Keenan, or anybody, that dog would run. But little by little, she earned the respect and the trust of that animal. And finally, just a few weeks ago, that dog went to be with Jesus. We hope. We hope it prays salvation prayer. You know, but dogs, what's that movie, All Dogs Go to Heaven? Well, there's some of them that are not going to make it, I can tell you that. But Blackie became a pet because it took how many years? Years for it to earn. And it all started with giving it something to eat. You see, Jesus on this occasion had fed the 5,000, and he had asked around different people. He was saying, how are we going to take care of these people? How are we going to feed these people? He looked at one or two of his disciples and says, how are we going to do this? And they looked at him and said, Lord, it's too far to go in town and get McDonald's or Jack in the Box or Burger King. It's just we can't get there. But I found this kid, and his mama gave him 5 flat pieces of bread and 2 little pieces of fish, maybe the size of sardines or whatever, and that's all we have. And Jesus really looked at them and rebuked them and said, you don't have very much faith. And Jesus did something. He took it and he gave thanks over it. And when he started passing it out, when they were done feeding the 5,000 plus, they had 12 baskets full left over. The interesting thing is we have started doing something on Sunday morning that is important, and I want you to get a hold of this as well. When Jesus thanked God for the bread and the fish, something miraculous happened in the heavenlies, that as they began to tear that bread and break that bread and pass it out, it began to meet the needs and more. So much more that it represented even the 12 disciples that had that many left over. They had more to do. I believe what Pastor Jerry did this morning, we're doing from every Sunday, is we're praying over the offering, thanking God for the offering, but why don't we start believing that God will multiply what you have given for you and for the church to meet the needs. A lot of times we don't have because we don't ask, and when we do receive, we're not thankful. But thanksgiving is a part of everything that God did. In Psalm 136, thanks be unto God who gives us a victory. On and on and on, he says, give thanks to God, and the end of it would be for his mercy endures forever. Aren't you thankful for God's mercy? It's new every morning. If you go to bed grumpy at night, you wake up the next morning, his mercy is new. You get to start over. You get to adjust your attitude and start over in his mercy. If you end the day in a good mood, guess what? He's got brand new mercies the next morning, and you wake up and you can start all over. You see, Psalm 34 verse 8 says, taste and see that the Lord is good. Now, Jesus lost most of his followers in this same setting because he said, you seek me because I fed you. But he said, more important, it is for you to eat my flesh and drink my blood. And they just absolutely went nuts and left. We talked about this on Wednesday evening for a little bit. But you see, Jesus was saying, don't eat my flesh and drink my blood, but experience who I am. Taste and see. That's experiencing. Let me give you some little thoughts on that. The word experience includes the four senses: touch, smell, sight, and hearing. Many people, especially kids, don't like something because the way it smells. Now, I'm an experienced kid. And I want you to think about this for a minute. If it doesn't smell good, I don't want it. But if I ever taste it, I can get over the aroma. Now hang on with me. I love sauerkraut. And it stinks. See, he's choking right there. I love curry powder and cumin seed. Made from Indian dishes from South India. I've learned how to do that. And my wife says, when you get done, air out the house, I'll come home and we'll eat a hamburger. I love the smell. But when I first smelled it, I thought it smelled like somebody's dirty socks or something. I don't know what it was. It was awful. But see, smell. Also, touch or texture. When we were living in Colorado, I had to be a man of the house and I had to learn to go hunting. So I got a gun and went out and I told the people on Sunday, if you'll honor God and be in church on Sunday, don't go hunting on Sunday, be in the house of God. On Monday morning, God will give you your deer. First Monday morning out, I got mine. Don't you think I preached for 3 weeks on that about honoring God on Sunday morning. I never would go hunting again because I didn't want to take the chance. That's faith. Messed up my sermon. But what happened is we had that deer processed and everything, and we put it on the table, and we did everything everybody told us to do to cover up the taste so the kids wouldn't know that it was deer meat, and we had deer steaks, and the first thing Marcus cuts into it and Keenan cuts into it, and they taste it and said, "Ooh, Daddy, it's funny." It wasn't the taste that bothered them, it was the texture. They could tell the difference. The other one is, I love onion. Chopped up, anyway, raw, sauteed, I love it in there. But there are people that hear the crunch of the onion and they don't like it. But you see, the texture, the aroma, it doesn't look good or it's crunchy. All draws conclusion that something is or isn't good. Too many times we draw conclusions about people. We draw conclusions about situations on a very limited understanding. And that's what they did with Jesus. He said something and immediately they took off and ran with it and said, he's nuts. He wants us to eat his flesh and drink his blood. When they wouldn't give him time to say, taste and see, try it out. Our world today is so backward on the whole thing about who Jesus is. And we fight Christianity and we offer everything else. But hear me today, Jesus is saying, don't judge me until you have experienced who I am and what I am. Leviticus 17:11 says the life of the flesh is in the blood. And Jesus' blood was shed and life poured out, not so we could eat his flesh and drink his blood, but that we would do it symbolically and say, I have experienced who he is, and I want to be part of who he is. And he said, this is a way that you remember me. As often as you do it in remembrance of me. By the way, there's no saving power in these elements, and nobody will be saved today because they partake of these elements that are before us. It is a benefit of recognizing who is the Lord of our lives. Some people serve wine. Some people serve grape juice. Some people bake bread, unleavened bread, and they break it up. Some people buy bread in the bookstore and bring it to church. It isn't the texture. It isn't what is here. It is the symbol that we recognize that His blood was shed so we could be saved, and His body was broken so that we could be healed. It all goes together. One of the most powerful sermons I ever heard preached and saw preached was when a man took a wine press and he put grapes in it and he had microphones around it and he would begin to tighten it as he preached. And you could hear the skin of the grape begin to break. And then you would begin to hear the trickle of the grape juice as it would go out. And you had to understand the body was broken not only for you, but for the blood that would cleanse everyone from their sin. What do we do when we come to the table? We have a communion table set up and a Thanksgiving decorated. We have 2 chairs here that if we had room, we'd have people to sit around the table, and we're going to gather around it. But on Thanksgiving Day and around this table, there's some things that we do when we come to the table to eat. First of all, when we sit down, or before we sit down, we wash our hands. How many of you just come to the table after you've milked the cows and you fed the chickens without washing your hands? You know what? I used to do that at home. And Mom would say, don't you touch a thing until you wash your hands. In other words, when you come to the table, you want to wash up first. And there's a lot in the scripture about it. But in 1 Corinthians 11:28, it says, let a man examine himself, so let him eat of the bread and drink of the cup. What is that about? When we come to this table, I was brought up sometime to say, if you've got sin in your life, don't you take these elements and all these bad things. But I'm going to tell you, if you have sin in your life, there is no greater time to confess that sin than when you're holding that element of the forgiveness of sin and you're holding that piece of bread and say, God, forgive me. You know, you don't have to go through shaking the hand of the preacher every time you do something wrong, or every time you do this, you go through this terrible thing. You have to just say, Father, forgive me, I'm sorry, and we take off and go from there. It's called cleansing. It's called being clean. None of us are without sin. The best one here today has something that will beset them somewhere, sometime. If you don't believe me, just get out on 156 and the speed limit is 60 and somebody from Ponder is going 25. Nobody in Justin would go 25. That happened to me this morning. And I had to hear the voice of the Lord say, mind what you're thinking, because you've got to preach. I pulled out on 156. The sign said 60. God meant for you to go 60 if the sign said 60. He put that in the book someplace. And the truck pulled out in front of me going 45. And I started to say something to them, but I knew they couldn't hear me. I started to say 45 is when you get past the Sonic. But I just tooled right along behind. And when we got to 45, they slowed down to 35. I wanted to pull up and say, my dear brother and sister, God said go 45 into 45, 35 into 35. You know, we laugh about that, but you know, some things just bother us. I won't even tell you the story about taking our dishwasher out last night. I thought, there's nothing to it. We have a plumber here. I don't want to bother him. There's nothing to it, Greg. I just go in. I'll just take the screws out. I'll just pull it out. And I did. And water went everywhere. Not only did water go everywhere, but the line wouldn't go where I wanted it to. And I was yanking and pulling on that thing. And I was singing, sweet Jesus, sweet Jesus. What a wonder you are. If you don't come down and kick this thing out of my house, we're going to have a come to Jesus meeting right here. And finally, I got it out. And Marla said, slow down, slow down. And then I just, I'm okay. There's nothing wrong with me. I took it out and put it on the curb, hoping some of those rich people over close to me will get it and use it in their house. You know, we have shortcomings. No one is without sin. But Jesus at this table says, if you honor me by taking this, cleanse yourselves when you come to this table. The second thing we do when we come to the table is have a good appetite. Now, one of the things that we don't do, now some people may, but in my house we don't grab a bag of chips and a Coke and a package of Twinkies and eat all the junk food we can all morning long. We really kind of do without, because we know that when we get to the table, we want to have a good appetite. We want to have the capacity to eat everything that's on the table. And the fact is, I've had to learn very hard not to fill my plate so big. As a matter of fact, in our house, we use paper plates most of the time. We used to get these big plates. And finally, when I started looking like the plate, we decided to go to smaller plates. Now, psychologically, that's supposed to say, have a good appetite, but don't fill your plate so big. The only difference is we use that one plate 3 or 4 times instead of getting it all in one. But the point of it is, when we come to the table, have an appetite. How do you have an appetite? It's a desire for the things of God. You see, if we taste and see, if we experience that Jesus is good, that we've been dealing with for weeks, then all of a sudden we start having a desire. We want to get together with God's people. We want to have fun with God's people. We want to see what God will do. We want, when we come together, to realize that if we have an appetite for God, we can come with a thankful heart and He will heal us. He will provide for us. He will do things. He will surprise us sometimes with special things that He gives us in our life. But if we fill up on junk food, we never will be hungry for the good things. What is the junk food? Let me just say, some of the world's full of sin. And if we're always partaking of the other things, we never have a desire for God. But if you say, well, you people at that church are kind of funny. Y'all want to get, you know why? Because we found out it satisfies longer than the things that are in the world. You see, the things in the world are kind of like a alcohol that numbs the feeling. And by the way, we all have ways of trying to numb the disasters that happen in our lives. But the best way is to allow the Spirit of God to begin to minister to us through other people who love Him. The third thing we need when we come around the table is patience. And I'm just going to put there, don't be in a hurry. Now, one of the things that Gary Everett does, we'll sit down, I'll be patient and be calm, we've got everything on the table. Once I fill my plate, we say grace. Marla will say, slow down. You going to a fire? Slow down and enjoy what you eat. Our newest member of the family, named Axel. I sit down and I give him instructions. Axel, when I give you this, chew it up and taste it. And all the while, he's trying to bite my fingers. And I'm saying, son, listen to me. Don't act like your mother. We all do that. And so as soon as I give it to Axel, he swallows it whole. Charlie, our oldest cocker, he not only loves food, but he loves tassels on shoes. And they don't chew it up. They swallow it whole. And after church, I'll tell you how I know. They don't have the patience to wait. They just gobble it down. time because the other dog might get it. Little Axel is learning by the other two that whenever I go to give a treat to Butters, he wants to go and grab it out of Butters' mouth. And Butters will turn around and bite his head off, literally bite his head off. You don't mess with my food. And they swallow it whole. I don't know why I grew up the way I did. I guess my parents were mean to me. But when they set food in front of me, I've got to eat it before every other dog gets it. You understand? But the Bible is trying to teach us when we come to the table, desire to have fellowship with Him and enjoy what these represent. If you need healing, take the time to receive the healing. If you need forgiveness, take the time to receive the love and forgiveness that God has. You see, we're in a hurry. Part of the problem is the part-time job that I have is we don't always get to eat on time. And it's really funny. I took someone to the southern part of the county, and after I dropped them off, I parked the vehicle behind Burger King. So some of you'll know I work for a funeral home. And so I park the hearse behind the Burger King, and I go in and I order, and I'm dressed like this. And there's a man in there that says, "Sir, I sure would like to have a job like you where you wear a suit." And I pulled my badge out of my pocket, and I said, "You can have." He looked at that and said, "Funeral homes." He said, "Oh, no, sir. No, sir. No, sir. I don't want anything to do with that." And then whenever I started to leave, all the workers, when people are waiting at the window, they're all watching me leave the parking lot. And I just waved at them and said, "You can have this if you want it." You know, it's funny because different things will disturb our emotional ability, and we need to take time to enjoy the presence of the Lord. The fourth thing that we need is harmony at the table. A lot of families will get into discussions they don't need to get into at the table. And sometimes we need to stop and think about, the church